There's something in the dark. You don't know what it is, you can't see it. But something in your brain, something very old, very deep, something that doesn't speak in words, is absolutely certain that it's there. And it's telling you, quietly but firmly, to not move, to not make a sound, to stay very, very still. You're an adult. You know there's probably nothing in the dark, and yet, that feeling, that specific, irrational, bone-deep certainty that darkness hides something that wants to hurt you, that's not a glitch. That's not a childhood leftover that you never quite shook. That is one of the oldest alarm systems on Earth running in your nervous system right now, completely unchanged from the version that kept your ancestors alive 100,000 years ago. And darkness is just the beginning. Today we're going into the fears that never left, the ones that started before civilization, before language, before written history, before almost everything we think of as human, and are still running quietly inside you right now, shaping your decisions, your anxieties, your deepest discomforts in ways you probably don't even notice. Let's start with darkness, because it's not just a fear, it's the first fear, or at least one of the oldest ones we can trace. For most of human evolutionary history, darkness was genuinely lethally dangerous. The big predators that hunted us, leopards, lions, hyenas, cave bears, were overwhelmingly nocturnal or crepuscular. They hunted at night or at dusk precisely because darkness gave them the advantage. Their eyes were built for low light. Ours were not. A human being alone in the dark 100,000 years ago was in genuine mortal danger. Not, this is uncomfortable danger, I might get eaten alive in the next 10 minutes danger. The individuals who felt intense, automatic fear in darkness, who froze, who retreated toward fire and shelter and other people, those individuals survived. The ones who were casual about darkness, who wandered off alone at night without a second thought, they got eaten, and they didn't pass that casual attitude toward darkness on to anyone. This is how evolution works. It's not subtle. It does not care about your comfort. It keeps what survives and removes what doesn't. Which is why, even now, even with electric lights and locked doors and rational adult brains that know perfectly well there's nothing under the bed, something in you still checks. Something in you is still scanning. Something in you hasn't gotten the update that says the leopards are gone. Now let's talk about a fear that's arguably even older, even more deeply embedded, and probably more actively shaping your life right now than the fear of darkness. The fear of being cast out, exile, social rejection, being removed from the group. In the modern world, we tend to think of social rejection as painful but survivable. Embarrassing maybe, distressing definitely, but you'll recover, you'll make new friends, you move on. In the Paleolithic, that calculation was completely different. In a small band of 20 to 50 people on the African savanna 100,000 years ago, if the group rejected you, if they decided you were a liability, a threat, a drain on resources, a person they no longer wanted, you didn't just have a bad week, you died. Slowly probably, alone, cold, hungry, without protection, without backup, without anyone to watch for predators while you slept. Social exclusion was a death sentence, not a metaphor, an actual, literal, practical death sentence. So evolution, doing what evolution does, wired us to feel the threat of social rejection with the same intensity, the same visceral alarm as a physical threat to our bodies. Your brain does not cleanly separate "someone is angry with me" from "I am in danger." It treats them with an eerily similar neural response. Studies using brain scans have shown that social rejection activates many of the same brain regions as physical pain, not similar regions, the same ones. This is why being ignored hurts, why being excluded from a group chat feels worse than it rationally should, why public humiliation can feel, for a moment, almost physically unbearable. Your nervous system is not being dramatic. It is running a program that, for most of human history, was exactly right, because social rejection was, quite literally, life-threatening. And this fear of exile doesn't just show up as fear, it shows up as behavior, as the exhausting, mostly unconscious work of managing how others see you, adjusting what you say, what you share, how you present yourself, constantly reading the social temperature, constantly checking whether you're still accepted, still liked, still safe inside the group. Every time you check how many likes a post got, every time you feel a small jolt of anxiety when someone doesn't text back, every time you change your opinion slightly because you can feel the room shifting, that's not weakness. That's a 100,000-year-old survival instinct doing exactly what it was designed to do. It just doesn't know we don't live in small tribes anymore. Let's move to the next one. Strangers. Xenophobia, the fear and distrust of the unfamiliar, the outsider, the person who isn't from your group, is one of the most universal and most destructive features of human psychology. It's also one of the most ancient. And before we get into the dark places this fear has taken humanity, and it has taken us to very dark places, it's worth understanding where it came from, because the fear of strangers wasn't born from hatred, it was born from statistics. In the Paleolithic, strangers were, on balance, dangerous, not because all strangers were bad people, but because in a world of limited resources, competing groups had competing interests. And a group of strangers encountered in the wild could mean conflict over food, territory, water sources, or mates. The historical and archaeological record shows real intergroup violence in prehistoric societies. Skeletal remains with healed and unhealed wounds consistent with violence, massacre sites, evidence of raiding. Your ancient ancestors who were instinctively cautious about strangers, who didn't immediately walk up to an unfamiliar group and offer them a warm welcome, were more likely to survive encounters that went badly. The ones who were instinctively trusting of all strangers were more likely to end up on the wrong side of a prehistoric conflict. So the caution got wired in, not as a conscious choice, as a reflex. And here's the uncomfortable part. That reflex is still running. Researchers studying implicit bias consistently find that the human brain categorizes in-group versus out-group extraordinarily quickly, faster than conscious thought, faster than deliberate reasoning. Within milliseconds of seeing a face, before any conscious evaluation, some part of your brain is already asking, is this person like me or not? That's ancient hardware. That's the same circuit that kept your ancestors alive on the savannah. And it doesn't care at all about how rational, how fair-minded, or how consciously anti-prejudiced you consider yourself to be. Understanding where this came from doesn't make its consequences less serious. The history of what humans have done with their fear of strangers is genuinely horrifying. But understanding the origin matters, because it means this isn't uniquely evil, it's universally human. Which means it's something every generation has to actively, consciously work against, knowing that the reflex never fully goes away. Now let's talk about hunger, or more specifically, the fear of not having enough. This one might feel less dramatic than predators in the dark or exile from the tribe, but in terms of sheer behavioral influence on modern life, the fear of scarcity might be the most powerful one on this list. For almost all of human history, food was not guaranteed. There was no refrigerator. There was no supermarket. There was no safety net. If the hunt failed, if the harvest failed, if drought came, if the migration routes shifted, people starved. Children starved. Entire groups could be decimated by a bad season. In that environment, hoarding wasn't greed. It was rational. Eating as much as possible when food was available wasn't gluttony. It was survival strategy. The individuals who felt the most intense drive to acquire, to store, to consume available resources when they had the chance, those individuals survived the lean periods better than the individuals who were satisfied with just enough. So evolution built in a drive for more that doesn't have an off switch, because in the ancestral environment, there was no reason to turn it off. Having more than you needed was almost impossible, and if you somehow managed it, that excess didn't last. It rotted, it was stolen, it was shared out of necessity. There was no stable surplus. And then, for some populations, everything changed. Agriculture, industry, supply chains, refrigeration. Supermarkets open 24 hours a day with more food than any single human could eat in a month. The fear of scarcity didn't get the update. The drive to acquire more food, more money, more resources, more security is still running hard in environments where there is, objectively, already enough. And it creates predictable results. Overconsumption, hoarding during crises, the deeply irrational anxiety felt even by the genuinely wealthy of never quite feeling like you have enough. This isn't a moral failing. It's an ancient drive operating in an environment it was never designed for. And finally, the one that underlies all the others, the fear that has been with us since before we were fully human. The fear that probably drove the evolution of consciousness itself. The fear of death. This one is different from the others because it requires something the others don't: self-awareness. You can't fear death unless you know you're going to die. And knowing you're going to die requires a theory of mind, the ability to project yourself forward in time, to imagine a future version of yourself that no longer exists. This kind of self-awareness seems to have emerged relatively recently in evolutionary terms, possibly within the last few 100,000 years. And almost the moment it did, humans started burying their dead. With care, with grave goods, with pigment and shells and personal objects, which suggests that almost the moment humans became aware of death, they started doing something about it, ritually, symbolically, communally. The management of death anxiety might be one of the most powerful engines in all of human culture. Religion, monuments, legacy, the desire to be remembered, the need to believe in something that outlasts the body. Art created to last beyond its maker. Children raised to carry something of the parent forward. All of it, at some level, is a response to the same ancient awareness. I exist, and I will not always exist. And that is terrifying. Terror management theory, a framework developed by psychologists Greenberg, Piaseczky, and Solomon, proposes that an enormous amount of human behavior, far more than we consciously recognize, is driven by the need to manage, suppress, or symbolically overcome the awareness of death. Our political beliefs, our need to belong to groups larger than ourselves, our search for meaning, our monuments, our religions, our art, our children. All of it, in part, a sophisticated cultural response to a fear that has no solution. So, let's pull back and look at what we've covered. Darkness, still making you check under the bed. Exile, still making you check your notifications. Strangers, still making you size up unfamiliar faces in milliseconds. Scarcity, still making you feel like you never have quite enough. Death, still shaping everything you believe and everything you build. None of these fears are irrational in origin. Every single one of them was a completely sensible, survival-critical response to a real danger in the world your ancestors actually lived in. And every single one of them is still running in you, right now, shaping your thoughts, your choices, your anxieties, your deepest preoccupations, mostly without your awareness and almost entirely without your permission. You are not irrational for being afraid of these things. You are ancient. You are carrying a 100,000-year-old nervous system into a world it was never designed for, doing the best you can. Which, honestly, given the circumstances, is pretty remarkable. Your ancestors were afraid of the dark, of being left behind, of the stranger on the horizon, of not having enough, of the end. So are you. So is everyone. That's not weakness. That's what it means to be human.